The screech of metal on metal was the sound of my father dying a second time. I stood on the porch in my silk bathrobe, the steam from my morning coffee curling into the chilly air, watching as a flatbed tow truck winched my 1967 cherry red Mustang, the only thing I had left of my dad, onto its cold steel back. When I screamed for Mark to stop the driver, he didn't even look at me. He simply checked his watch, adjusted his tie, and told me that the final payment for his mother's 3-month luxury Mediterranean cruise was due by noon, and since I wouldn't contribute to her happiness, he had taken matters into his own hands. That car wasn't just an asset to be liquidated, it was my soul, and my husband had just sold it to fund his mother's retirement fantasy. Before that morning, if you had asked me about my marriage, I would have described it as a well-tended garden. Mark and I had been married for 8 years, and for 7 of those, I truly believed I was the luckiest woman alive. We lived in a charming 2-story colonial in a quiet suburb of Virginia, the kind of house that always smelled like cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings and fresh eucalyptus in the evenings. I was a senior project manager for a tech firm, and Mark worked in mid-level insurance. I was the primary breadwinner, bringing home nearly triple his salary, but I never let it become a point of contention. I loved him, or at least, I loved the version of him I thought I knew. Our home was my sanctuary. I spent my weekends tending to the hydrangeas or tucked away in the garage, which had become my private chapel. My father, a mechanic who could listen to an engine and tell you exactly which bolt was loose, had spent 10 years restoring that Mustang with me. Every Saturday of my childhood was spent under that chassis, grease staining our foreheads, laughing as he taught me about torque and tradition. When he passed away 3 years ago, that car became my living connection to him. When I sat in those leather seats, I could still smell his faint scent, a mix of peppermint gum and motor oil. It was the only thing I owned that wasn't ours. It was mine. Then there was Beatrice. My mother-in-law was a woman who navigated the world with the grace of a swan and the territorial aggression of a badger. For years, she played the role of the doting, lonely widow to perfection. She lived in a small, cramped apartment 3 towns over, and every time she visited, she made sure to sigh heavily while looking at our crown molding or our stainless steel appliances. "It must be so nice, Elena, to have so much space," she would say, her eyes lingering on my designer handbag or the expensive espresso machine. When my Harold was alive, we talked about traveling, seeing the world, but he left me with so little, just memories and a leaky faucet. I felt for her, initially. I really did. I'd treat her to spa days, buy her high-end skincare, and make sure she was included in every holiday. But over the last year, her needs had shifted from subtle hints to blatant demands. It started with her car breaking down. Instead of letting us help her fix it, she insisted Mark drive her everywhere, which meant Mark was constantly borrowing my car or leaving work early. Then came the health scares, vague palpitations that only seemed to occur when Mark and I had plans for a romantic weekend away. 3 months ago, the cruise obsession began. Beatrice had seen a glossy brochure for a grand Mediterranean odyssey, a 90-day voyage that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She didn't just want to go. She felt she was owed it. "I gave my youth to raising my son," she announced during a Sunday dinner, daintily patting her mouth with a napkin. "Mark, don't you think I deserve to see the Amalfi Coast before I'm too old to walk it?" Mark had looked at me, his eyes pleading. It would be the trip of a lifetime for her, Elle. She's had such a hard time lately." "Mark, we're saving for the kitchen remodel and our own retirement," I had said gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "A $60,000 cruise for one person isn't a gift. It's a down payment on a house. We simply can't justify that." "You can't justify it," Mark snapped, his face reddening. "But you can justify keeping that old car in the garage? It's worth a fortune, Elena. It's just sitting there, gathering dust, while my mother is rotting away in that apartment." "That old car is my father, Mark," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "And it's not ours. He left it to me. Personally, I will never sell it. Not for a kitchen, and certainly not for a vacation. He had gone quiet then, that heavy, brooding silence that I had mistakenly interpreted as him conceding the point. For the next few weeks, he was suspiciously helpful. He made dinner, he stopped bringing up his mother's travel plans, and he even started helping me detail the Mustang on Saturday afternoons. I thought we had moved past it. I thought he finally understood the boundaries of my inheritance and my grief. The night before the tow truck arrived, Beatrice had come over for dinner. She was uncharacteristically cheerful, sipping her wine and smiling at me with a look that I now realize was pure, unadulterated triumph. "You know, Elena," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "Mark told me how much you value family. It's so rare these days to find a daughter-in-law who truly understands the meaning of sacrifice." "I think family is the most important thing we have, Beatrice," I replied, feeling a strange chill despite the warmth of the dining room. Mark had reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "She's right, Mom. Elna is going to make sure you get exactly what you deserve." I smiled back at them, completely oblivious to the fact that they were speaking in a code I hadn't yet cracked. I went to bed that night feeling peaceful, listening to the crickets outside our window, unaware that Mark had already signed the forged bill of sale and coordinated the pickup for 7 a.m. I didn't know that the man sleeping beside me had spent the evening counting the days until his mother would be sipping champagne on a deck in Greece, paid for by the literal blood, sweat, and tears of my dead father. When the sun rose the next morning, I wasn't just losing a car. I was waking up to the realization that my husband was a stranger who had been plotting to rob me in plain sight, and the woman I had tried so hard to love was the one holding the map to the vault. Looking back, the red flags weren't just waving, they were screaming. I was simply too blinded by my own loyalty to hear them. 3 weeks before the tow truck arrived, I found Beatrice in the garage. She wasn't just looking at the Mustang. She was running her hand along the fender with a proprietary air that made my skin crawl. She had a notepad in her hand, scribbling something down. "Just admiring the craftsmanship, Elena," she had said when I caught her, her voice smooth and unbothered. "A friend of mine, a collector, was telling me that the market for these 67 models is at an all-time high. He mentioned 60, maybe 70,000 for one in this condition. It seems almost selfish, doesn't it, to keep so much capital locked away in a piece of metal when people are suffering." "My father isn't capital, Beatrice," I had replied, my voice tight. "And he's not a piece of metal. That car stays here." Then there was Mark's sudden interest in my paperwork. He had asked me, quite casually over dinner, where I kept the original title and the restoration logs. "For the insurance," he had claimed. "In case of a fire or a flood, we need to make sure the valuation is up to date." I had pointed to the small fireproof safe in my home office, trusting him with the code as I had trusted him with my life. I didn't notice the way his hands trembled slightly as he wrote the code down, nor did I question why he began spending so much time in that office late at night, claiming he was catching up on emails. The whispers started a week later. I'd walk into the kitchen and find them huddled together, their voices dropping to a low hum the moment the floorboards creaked under my feet. Mark would suddenly become very interested in the contents of his coffee mug, and Beatrice would offer me a tight, artificial smile that never reached her eyes. "Is everything okay?" I asked Mark one evening, after catching him on a hushed phone call on the patio. "Fine, Elle, just work stress," he snapped, refusing to look me in the eye. He was vibrating with a nervous energy I'd never seen before, a frantic, cornered animal look. "You're always so suspicious lately. It's exhausting." He turned the tables so effectively that I ended up apologizing to him. I spent the next few days trying to be less exhausting, buying his favorite steaks for dinner and ignoring the way he flinched every time my phone buzzed, as if he expected a call that would ruin him. The morning of the betrayal, the point of no return, began with a silence so profound it felt heavy. I woke up at 6:45 a.m. to an empty bed. Usually, Mark was a heavy sleeper, but the sheets on his side were already cold. I pulled on my robe, thinking he'd gone down to start the coffee. Instead, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of a diesel engine idling in our driveway. I walked to the window and my heart stopped. A massive flatbed truck was backed up to our garage. A man in grease-stained coveralls was hooking a heavy chain to the front axle of my father's Mustang. Mark was standing next to him, holding a manila folder, nodding as if he were discussing the weather. "Mark?" I whispered, my voice failing me. I ran down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood, and burst through the front door. "Mark, what is happening? Stop! Stop that right now!" The tow truck driver looked up, hovering his hand over the winch control. "Is there a problem, ma'am? Mr. Sterling said the vehicle was ready for transport to the buyer." "Buyer?" The word felt like a physical blow to my chest. I turned to Mark, who was now looking at me with a mixture of defiance and a sickening kind of pity. "Elena, go back inside," he said, his voice flat and robotic. "We talked about this. My mother needs this trip. She's depressed, she's lonely, and she's given us everything. This car is just sitting here. It's the only way to get the cash by the noon deadline." "I never agreed to this," I screamed, stepping between the truck and my car. "This is my car, Mark. It's in my name. You can't sell it." Mark didn't flinch. He slowly opened the manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it out to me, his fingers steady now that the secret was out. "Actually, Elle, it's not in your name anymore. You signed the title transfer over to me 4 days ago, don't you remember?" I grabbed the paper. It was a copy of the vehicle title. There, at the bottom, was my signature. It looked exactly like mine. The slight tilt of the E, the way I always looped the Y. But I hadn't signed it. I had never even seen this document. The world began to tilt. A sharp, high-pitched ringing started in my ears, drowning out the sound of the idling truck. I felt a cold, oily sweat break out across my neck and forehead. My lungs felt like they were filling with sand. No matter how deep I breathed, I couldn't get any oxygen. The edges of my vision went black, tunneling down until all I could see was that forged signature. My stomach lurched, a wave of violent nausea hitting me so hard I had to lean against the brick pillars of the porch to keep from collapsing. "You forged my name," I whispered, the realization finally breaking through the shock. "You went into my safe, took the title, and forged my name to sell my father's car. For a cruise?" "It's for the family, Elena," Mark shouted, his face suddenly contorted with a bizarre, self-righteous anger. "You were being selfish. I'm the man of this house, and I won't let my mother suffer because you want to cling to a dead man's ghost. The money is already being wired. It's done." I watched, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the violation, as the winch began to groan. The Mustang, my father's legacy, the car I had spent hundreds of hours under, the car that smelled like my childhood, was slowly dragged up the metal ramp. The metal-on-metal screech felt like it was tearing through my own skin. Just then, the front door of Beatrice's car, parked across the street, opened. She stepped out, dressed in a brand-new, expensive linen travel suit, a pair of oversized sunglasses perched on her head. She didn't look guilty. She looked at the Mustang being loaded onto the truck, and then she looked at me. She didn't say a word, but she leaned against her car and smiled. A slow, predatory grin of a woman who had finally gotten exactly what she wanted. My husband had robbed me, and my mother-in-law was standing there enjoying the show. The man I loved had turned my father's memory into a ticket for a boat ride, and as the truck pulled away, taking the last piece of my heart with it, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't a sad break. It was the sound of a lock snapping open. The lucky wife was gone. In her place, a cold, jagged fury began to rise, as dark and unstoppable as the oil that used to stain my father's hands. The silence that followed the departure of the tow truck was heavier than the engine's roar had ever been. I stood in the driveway, my breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches, staring at the empty space in the garage where my father's Mustang had lived for 3 years. The oil stain on the concrete, the one Dad and I had laughed about because she's got character, looked like a fresh wound. Beatrice sauntered toward me, her heels clicking on the pavement with a rhythmic, taunting precision. She stopped just a few feet away, smelling of expensive lilies in triumph. She reached out as if to pat my arm, but I recoiled, as if her touch were a hot iron. "Now, Elena," she said, her voice smooth and maternal, a tone she used only when she was about to twist the knife. "Don't be melodramatic. It's just a car, a machine. Think of the joy this will bring me. Think of the memories I'll make. Isn't that what your father would have wanted? For his investment to help his daughter's family?" "Get off my property," I whispered. My voice was low, vibrating with a level of rage I didn't know I possessed. "Elena, honey, calm down," Mark said, stepping up behind his mother. He looked smaller than he had 5 minutes ago. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he studied a hangnail on his thumb. "Mom sold her lease, Elle. She doesn't have an apartment anymore. She used that money for the down payment on the cruise, but the car covers the rest of the fare and her living expenses for when she gets back." The first twist hit me like a physical punch to the solar plexus. "She sold her lease? Where is she supposed to live, Mark?" Mark cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the house. We talked about it. The guest room. It's perfect for her. She'll be here starting tonight until she leaves for the port, and then she'll move in permanently when she returns in 3 months. It makes financial sense, Elena. We're a family." The world seemed to fracture. It wasn't just the car. They had orchestrated a complete takeover of my life, my home, and my sanctuary, while I was busy working 60 hours a week to provide for them. "You decided this? Without me?" I asked, my voice rising. "In the house my salary pays for? In the house my parents helped me buy?" "It's my house too," Mark snapped, finally finding his voice, though it was shrill and defensive. "I live here. I contribute." "You contribute $3,000 a month to a mortgage that costs $5,000, I fired back. "I pay for the insurance, the taxes, the food, and your mother's emergency medical bills. Where has your money been going, Mark? If you're so invested in this family, where is your contribution to this cruise?" Mark's face went pale, then a mottled, guilty purple. He looked at Beatrice, who suddenly found a very interesting spot on the horizon to examine. I've been helping Mom," he stammered, "for the last 2 years. Her emergencies. They weren't always medical, Elena. She had some credit card issues. I've been covering her minimums." The second twist, the savings Mark claimed he was building for our future, the nest egg he told me was growing in his private account, didn't exist. He had been funneling thousands of dollars into his mother's black hole of debt, while I carried the entire weight of our household. I felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea. My hands weren't just shaking now. They were numb. I pulled my phone from my robe pocket, my fingers fumbling as I opened my banking app. I checked the joint savings account, the one we used for property taxes and house repairs. "Zero," I whispered. My heart did a sickening roll in my chest. "Mark, the joint account is empty. There was $22,000 in there." "I needed to book the excursions, Elena," Beatrice interjected, her mask of sweetness finally slipping. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing with a cold, hard greed. "Do you have any idea how much a private tour of the Vatican costs? Or a car service in Monaco? I can't be expected to take a bus with the common tourists. Mark promised me a luxury experience." "You stole from our tax savings?" I turned to Mark, who was now literally hiding behind his mother's shoulder. "That money was for the IRS, Mark. We're going to be audited. We could lose the house." "You'll figure it out, Elena," Mark muttered, his cowardice finally reaching its peak. "You always do. You're the smart one, remember? You're the one with the big shot job. What's 20 grand to you? You'll make it back in a few months. But my mother, she's 65. She's running out of time." "I am standing right here," Beatrice shrieked, suddenly pivoting into a performance of wounded fragility. She began to fake sob into a lace handkerchief she had ready in her pocket. "I am being attacked. In my own son's home. Oh, Mark, I told you she was cold. I told you she didn't value me. She cares more about a pile of rusted metal and a bank balance than she does about a lonely widow's happiness. Look what you're doing to her, Mark yelled at me, emboldened by his mother's tears. You're being cruel, Elena. You're being abusive. Mom is a guest in this house, and you will treat her with respect. She is not a guest, I said, my voice turning to ice. The nausea was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like it could cut through stone. And this is not your house to offer. The deed is in my name, Mark. My father made sure of that when he helped me with the down payment. He didn't trust you. He never did. And God, how right he was. Mark's bravado vanished instantly. Wait, what? The deed. We're married, Elena. It's marital property. Not in this state, and not with the trust my father set up, I replied. I felt a click inside my head. The moment of transformation. The woman who pleaded and cried was gone. You have 30 minutes to get her things out of my guest room. And Beatrice? You might want to cancel that private tour of the Vatican. You're going to need that money for a lawyer. You wouldn't, Beatrice hissed, her tears vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. You'll look like a monster, selling your husband's mother's dream, evicting a widow. Watch me, I said. I turned my back on them and walked into the house, locking the door behind me. I didn't head for the bedroom to cry. I headed for the office. I needed to see exactly how much they had stolen, because I knew, I felt it in my bones, that the car and the savings account were only the beginning. As I sat at my desk, my pulse thrumming in my ears like a war drum, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for the girl who used to sit under a Mustang with her dad, believing the world was a safe place. That girl was gone, but the woman she became was about to make them regret the day they ever thought I was an easy mark. The fury that rose in me wasn't hot. It was a sub-zero crystalline stillness that sharpened my vision. I sat at my desk and pulled my personal laptop, the one I never shared with Mark, from its hidden sleeve. My fingers, usually so nimble on the keyboard, felt like steel rods. Within 20 minutes, I had the confirmation. Mark hadn't just stolen the joint savings. He had accessed my secondary account by resetting the password using my old tablet, which I'd left in the guest room. He had siphoned off my year-end bonus, $15,000, and transferred it to an offshore travel agency to pay for Beatrice's upgrades. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called Jim, my father's lifelong friend and the most ruthless estate attorney in the county. Jim, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. Mark forged my signature on a title transfer. He sold my father's Mustang to fund his mother's vacation. They've cleared out $37,000 of my personal and joint funds. I need the police. I need an injunction. And I need them out of my house by sunset. Elna? Jim's voice was gravelly and sharp. Don't move. Don't talk to them. I'm calling the precinct. That car is a registered classic with a distinct VIN. It won't be hard to track. But you need to stay cold. Can you do that? I'm already frozen, Jim, I replied. I walked downstairs. Mark was in the kitchen, casually making a sandwich as if he hadn't just dismantled our marriage. Beatrice was in the guest room. I could hear her humming a show tune as she zipped up a suitcase. The sheer audacity of their normalcy was the final spark. The police are on their way, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Mark dropped his knife. It clattered against the granite countertop, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed in the sudden silence. He looked at me, his mouth hanging open, his eyes darting to the window. Elena, don't be crazy, he stammered. It's a family matter. We can talk about this. I'll pay you back. Eventually. With what money, Mark? I asked. You don't have a cent that isn't mine. You're a thief, and Beatrice is an accomplice. Beatrice appeared at the top of the stairs, her face twisted into a mask of indignation. A thief! I am your mother-in-law. I am family. How dare you speak to my son that way? You aren't family, Beatrice, I said, looking her directly in the eye. You're a parasite. and you're about to find out that the host has stopped feeding you. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and stern voices. The police arrived just as the tow truck driver, who had fortunately only made it to a local holding lot 10 miles away, responded to Jim's emergency injunction. When the officers entered the house, Mark's bravado collapsed into a pathetic, whimpering heap. He sat on the sofa, his head in his hands, completely silent as I showed the officers the forged title and the digital trail of the bank transfers. "I didn't mean to," Mark whispered, finally looking up as an officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "I just wanted her to be happy, Elle. She's my mother." "And he was my father," I said, my voice echoing in the hallway. "But you wouldn't know anything about loyalty, would you? You only know how to take." The killer blow came when the officer informed Beatrice that because the funds used to pay for her cruise were the proceeds of a felony, forgery and grand theft, those funds were being frozen as evidence. The travel agency was being served with a clawback order. "My cruise!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice reaching a frantic, bird-like pitch. "You can't take my cruise! I've already bought the sun hats. I've told everyone at the club." "You should have bought a bail bondsman instead," I told her. She wasn't arrested that day. The police needed more time to process her involvement. But Mark was. I watched from the porch, the same place I had stood in my bathrobe hours earlier, as my husband was led to a patrol car in handcuffs. He looked back at me once, his face pale and tear-stained, pleading for a mercy I no longer possessed. I didn't say a word. I just watched the car pull away. The retribution was swift and surgical. With Jim's help, I filed for an annulment based on fraud. Since the house was purchased with my premarital assets and my father's gift, and since Mark had actively embezzled from me, the court stripped him of any claim to the property. The Mustang was returned to my garage 3 days later, unscathed, but for a small scratch on the bumper that I polished out myself, my hands steady and sure. Mark ended up taking a plea deal, 5 years of probation, full restitution, and a felony record that ensured he'd never work in insurance again. Beatrice, having lost her apartment and her son's support, ended up in a tiny, state-subsidized senior living facility, 3 states away, living on the very meager Social Security she had spent years trying to avoid. 6 months later, the colonial house feels different. The air is lighter, the scent of cinnamon replaced by the clean, crisp smell of fresh rain and expensive wax. It's a Saturday morning, and the sun is spilling across the kitchen floor in long golden ribbons. I'm sitting on the back porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the birds flutter around the hydrangeas. I walked out to the garage and pulled the cover off the Mustang. The cherry red paint glowed like a jewel in the morning light. I climbed into the driver's seat, the leather creaking familiarly beneath me. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, breathing in the scent of peppermint gum and motor oil, feeling my father's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. I realized then that they hadn't just tried to steal a car. They had tried to steal my peace. But peace isn't something that can be forged or sold. It's something you build, bolt by bolt, until it's strong enough to carry you home. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a deep, rhythmic growl that drowned out the ghosts of the past. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the architect of my own quiet, beautiful freedom. Some people spend their lives looking for a port in a storm, but I've learned that it's much better to be the storm itself.